So why am I on File Explorer? I think is a good question and a valid one. It's because this is just going to be a basic setup for what I want to do. Because there's so many facets and areas that I want to focus on for creating my project. Which, if you are unaware of what the project is, there's a link to a channel down in the panels below that will bring you to a video that hopefully explains it well, that I've spent time to make. So I'm going to be creating we're just going to be world building and lore building to a fictional world that I have the premise of in my head, and we're going to be going from having none of it created to having all of it created and having a story that we can tell, which is going to, consist of characters, buildings, areas, like storylines, story arcs, whatever. So here's how we're going to go about it. With File Explorer, not the most interesting stream content, you could say, because it's not visually stimulating. I have a couple of these. I'm going to move these out. I'm going to create individual folders for everything that we want to make. I'm going to rename things, and this one we won't be touching for a while. It's the main story, so once we have some information built up about the world, then we'll focus on this more. But for now, we'll leave that untouched, and we'll just drop that in there. You know what? I will create a big folder for them. It's just simpler that way. And we'll call it world building, because that is exactly what we'll be doing. So the power system goes in there. Main story goes in there, location goes in there, and these are just kind of other things for the project that aren't necessarily to do with the actual story themselves. So this will be kind of what we focus on. Linking these while we're working on them might be a little confusing at first. Especially because, we'll be saying like characters here. The characters is going to have a bunch of things in it, like the names of the characters, and then we're going to have little bios for the characters, which I guess we'll make files for everything to be overacted into one. So if the character's name, just random examples like, like Monica or something, Monica will have, this is character design, this is concept art, this is relationships that she has with other characters. So, but the thing is, now that we have like a separated thing for power and then characters, we'll be creating like power concepts. We'll be creating power concepts, and then we'll be attributing them to characters. And maybe, it might seem like a bad thing to do, to create a lot of our characters based off of the powers that we come up with at first. But I do have a plan with that, and I feel like I can get it to work, so I'm not too concerned at all about working from what they can do and then eventually building a character that's interesting and has a good story to tell, and how that kind of goes with how they act and how their powers work. So I do have a bunch of character ideas written down for bunch of character ideas written down already for some of what the powers could be, But maybe I should explain what the powers are first better. I did touch on it in my introduction video to what the Zone project is, which if you haven't seen, go check out. I'm not sure if I told you to do that already. I've tried recording and streaming this little setup already, and I've failed multiple times just out of being nervous. That's fine. We don't need to concern ourselves with any of that anymore. So let's move on to what. So we have characters, locations, main story. I feel like main story is a little bit of a weird one because that will have very like non-specific pieces of information in it, right? Like what I have in story beats, which is a weird. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I have it labeled story beats. I guess I want to hit the right notes in terms of storytelling. General vibe, impact, character dynamics, character progression, character motivations, ideology and lifestyle, and tone. But none of these. I guess those are the things I need to build a story around. And those are the things that I have listed for now. So I guess those are things that I'd put in there, but I'd also put in the character. So a lot of this is going to be overlapping information that's stored in different areas of like the folders. Like right now, I also want to write create a folder for the factions and how they interact, which I guess kind of plays into location a bit more. It plays into location in a very large way, but the location folder is mostly going to serve in terms of background, art, and plotting out where everything is, because I do want to have like a functional map of the area. Hopefully that's something that I may leave loosely, but I think it's always good to have a map laid out beforehand, so you don't accidentally like contradict yourself by like creating landmarks and buildings that just aren't there the next time the characters are on the same road or next to the same building. So we'll properly establish like a sort of map. It's not going to be a fully fleshed out map, but maybe we could as well, and maybe we can use that for some establishing shots. And so yeah, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, yeah, a map is a good idea. You need a map. So map, landmarks, and specific details about certain areas. And the thing that would be overlapping with factions would be the fact that it would have a sort of grid area of showing where the gang is like to congregate, or that's just the areas that they own, because the city is very heavily under control by these gangs, which I guess I can get into at a later date. Do I want to hold off on the powers for the simple fact that it might be more interesting to cover at a later date? Because I think that might be better. I think that might be best. This is more a setup video and a setup stream. And to be honest, I think that's probably what I want to focus on next stream. I did have a couple of characters in mind and ideas for some characters already, but they're very, very, very vague at the moment. Like, most of the characters aren't named even, which I'm not sure is something you do first, or if that's something you leave for later on. Yeah, so I think we need a bit of an overview. I think that's maybe where I should focus on at first, in very, very loose detail. I'll move on to other things and then I'll return. Main city's a little different. I'll go to story. We'll just go to story points. Keep in mind all these are going to sound a bit ridiculous. A bit ridiculous and simplistic, not like out there. They're going to sound like very basic things and story blocks to build upon. These are just things I wrote down at an early stage. These are things I want to focus on in a while after we get some like base story elements working, because they are extremely important for the story, but I'd rather have a better idea of where I'm going with the story before I decide on like deciding I want to go overly comedic or you know, have it be inherently dark, or if I want to try and mix between multiple tones, I guess. Okay, so for this, I'm just gonna write very basic story concepts and bask in the glory of how awful my spelling is. I am dyslexic, but I think there's a certain point where it's just me being an idiot a lot of the time. Okay, so very, very basic. Okay, I'm gonna add a couple of varies to this because I don't want anyone to think that they're like the main plot points that I'm building around. Yeah, okay, so the protag, I want them to be in a situation where they're returning to the city that they grew up in. They haven't exactly decided the age range of the characters. They're probably going to be pretty young just because it's a lot. It's done to death having younger protagonists, but it's just a lot easier to root for someone who has room for growth and is still like developing, honestly. So I'm not going to make them too young since it's going to be gang violence. And I haven't even decided on how dark of a story I'm going to make it, or if I'm going to make it comedic. But yeah, the character will need to move back into their place due to some circumstance. I don't know, because having the character that would be, returning to the city that they grew up in because their parents that had moved away had died, or if they had just ran away from home. I guess we can have that be run away, which is, a good way to get involved in gang violence, especially if the parents have displayed no interest in pursuing, which we can build upon. Which is definitely something that we can. These are very simple character attributes and backstories that leave a lot of room for exploration. Childhood friend being the one who the kind of plot device, so to speak, that leads them into joining the gang. It's not like the character had like ran away from home and then was like, I want to join a gang. The friend would be, hey, this is what I'm up to. Maybe the friend could be an orphan, and then maybe they could run away from home, and then it's just two, young adults not knowing how much, how to live and get by in a city. They know how to get work, so to speak. And that was also another thing for deciding on how important it is for gangs to control certain areas. So whether or not all gangs are involved in gang crime, some just think they're tough shit and want to control an area. Some being like mafia-like and wanting to, run it for multiple different reasons and kind of have like a racketeering setup. Main Groups 1 is still undecided, honestly. I have the working title of 1, which I think it's been used by a couple of things, or even just parodied by a bunch of things, because like there are stories that have the character with the name of like zero, so taking the piss people say like one, two, or even yeah, I can think of like cartoons, anime, films that have characters named zero or one. So maybe one isn't what we go with. That can be changed at any point. All of this can be changed at any point, but there are certain parts that are very, very loosely. I did want young. I did want one to be young. That's actually an important element, but he needs to be a part of multiple gangs. So that needs to be noted. So the thing about this is, I will be spoiling my own story, so to speak, but we'll be working on it for a long time, and I'm not going to show my entire process of creating a comic without showing the spoilers of the story that we're building. And it's important that, people get in on what's going on. So, Protag succeeds one. But at the same time, don't think you know when that's going to happen at all, because I've had planned for a bunch of different elements that I could introduce into this story. So when the character will be prepared for something like that, and when one would be prepared to let off that responsibility, would be up for a big debate whether or not it would be like a season 2 thing or a season 7 thing. It's what arc I would want, and 7's being very, very, very generous. So it's kind of a fun story to kind of follow along with a character who joins at the base level and works their way up, almost like Sleeping Dog style, even though. The main conflict from the beginning isn't just basic basic gang warfare, so to say. One, let's have that. Is in trouble for loosely handing out powers to others. The main idea of what I was going to do is have the gangs be in control of in control of relics that can give you powers. Now, when you get given a power, it. Sorry, one sec. Notifications. Sorry about that. When you get given a power, it means that you'd be trusted in the gang, and these are powerful things that exist in the world, and only people with power really have them, because once something like this sprouts up, you either have a government that would take control of something like that, but in this case, it's not really a government or law enforcement in any way. It's actually the criminal underworld, but they can have a code of conduct where you only give powers to people that you trust. So only trusted members and loyal members of your gang would receive powers, and there's sort of an unspoken rule as to like, don't hand out powers randomly to like a bunch of people that have just joined your gang, because then you're just armed a bunch of like street strangers that the gang doesn't know too well. They're not all too loyal to their gang. They might not know how to use things. So a lot of gangs will have like a bunch of people who don't have zones or don't have access to the power, because it's something that has to be bestowed upon a member. When we first encounter one, as we're calling him now, he's in a very unique kind of situation where he needs to hand things out and needs to hand powers out, and gain loyal members, and he should really only be aiming to get loyal members to his gang, which means he would be kind of preying on people that are in kind of a vulnerable position, which kind of makes you question the morality of a character that we're following heavily. He's not necessarily the main protagonist, but in terms of season one, he almost is, because he's the person whose story that we're following the most. It'll kind of be a split between him and the actual protagonist. One's put into a situation where he's so weak that he has to recruit a bunch of different members into his gang. But doing that will also make him even more targeted than he already is, because it's more of a desperate attempt type thing, because he's like recruiting these people because he's being targeted by two gangs at once, and fighting a war on two sides can be very exhausting and can leave you in a very vulnerable position. So he's fighting a war on two fronts, and is like, if I don't act quick, we're just going to be wiped. So he starts handing out powers a bit, what seems to be like very willingly, just randomly giving them out, which kind of attracts the attention of more people. So now not only is he fighting a war on two fronts, but he's like now kind of known for doing something that he really shouldn't, and is now in a bad standing with everyone. He's just in a bad standing. This will kind of lead to the driving conflict of the main story. Regain control and traction against other gangs. Importance of clothing. Okay. Yeah, it's more of a design thing. I'll write it down. It could be a number of things where it's like characters individually, because I know there's some things I want to represent with one's clothing. Although I do like the idea, because, you know, having a story and having wanting to create a world with a very unique style. Basically, not cookie cutter outfits for people, but having gangs that have a sort of a kind of visual theme to them, with opposing views. And I'm pretty sure what I meant by that was there's the antagonist who had killed and succeeded the gang leader that one was previously a part of before one started his own gang, and kind of segregated himself from this person. I don't know why I've kind of labeled him Kingslayer. I'm not sure if that's a reference to Game of Thrones or what I was doing there, but their working name is Kingslayer for the time being. Also want to focus on how law enforcement works in the world, because we're having a lot of, you know, criminal activity going on. Gangs interact with one another, and the idea of a lawless society, kind of like Meteor City from Hunter x Hunter, is kind of interesting, where you just kind of have self-governed people. But it seems like it could get very chaotic. But maybe that is like a lot of what the racketeering is. I'm thinking about law enforcement. It's very limited. So maybe the mafia and like the underworld kind of dictate how things are run. So if anyone like has a petty crime, maybe like the mafia looks into it, and maybe, or I say mafia, there's only going to be one gang that's kind of mostly based off of the mafia, which we can touch on later. So maybe I do want to have some sort of law enforcement that exists in a very limited capacity. So maybe only for maybe potential like paying off. Where you can have the law enforcement as an overhead type thing for the gang. The gangs kind of just get along with what the law enforcement say. I think there's a lot of areas we can focus on with the law enforcement in comparison to how the underworld works. So we'll need to come back to that one definitely. I'm gonna save this for now. I'll cover a few of the factions that I had in mind. So there's the main group. I feel we should just write down first. Also make sure I don't forget about power concepts. I might go over them too, and then we'll probably call it a day. Just because I'm introducing like a bunch of things at once, I guess. Led by one. They're going to be short-handed, and I hate using the word nubile. I should pick a better word for that. What I mean by that is just we'll get rid of the word nubile. Just all the members that are part of the gang. All the members that are part of the gang are actually kind of rather new. So alright, noobs. No, inexperienced. I don't know how to spell. This will be a common issue. I should look it up, but I won't do it right now because I'm not quick enough. I should also stop singing because that is not a talent I have. They're inexperienced. That's pretty much what we have for now. We can move on to just listing out some of the ideas that I had for factions. This is going to be one that comes along at a later point. They're not going to be the main antagonists for the first season. The premise of these guys are a brutal. Let's call them brutal faction for now. Well, it's not what they're called. Fat kitchen, brutal faction. These guys are more of the like darker and gritty type people that like actually want to cause pain, and they're just kind of horrible people. But the fun thing about these guys is they don't actually have access to the zone's power. They don't have a relic that gives them powers, so they don't have any of these benefits that the other people do. But they're very violent and very angry group, so they're still not to be like messed with because they're out for blood and they don't really care about other guys. And they're also clued into what the relics are, which like a lot of people aren't, and that I'll go into that more when we look at the power concept. Yeah, we'll talk about the power concept more in a while. And aware of relics. Those are two different points put onto one, but I was just mostly saying what I've already said, so I guess that didn't really matter. Not have a relic. We have a fun couple of characters that I've thought about that could go with that group. These guys, they will gain control of a relic during one of the arcs, which means that the group that were already intimidating and scary just got a lot more scary because they got access to powers that they were they're competent in fighting before they had them. Now they have them, so now you have to worry about it. And that's when they'll kind of shift focus to become not the main antagonist, but like the main antagonist of that arc in that season, led by one's childhood friend. So you have that going for it. Opposing viewpoints / foil. Has more of a legacy built up. Sorry about all that. Sorry. I just figured since I'm making you look at File Explorer and Notepad after all this time that I may as well give you something a little more visually stimulating. Especially since I don't have the overlay. I should probably get an overlay set up soon. And the sun is rising because it is 5 a.m. Oh, saying that, now I've made it harder for myself. I cannot read this. I wrote this in green pen. Why would I write this in green pen? Yeah, so they have many hands on deck for their gang. That's pretty much the thing. They're going to be the main focus of the first season. Who else? We're going to also have, as I mentioned before, Mafia, Dons type gang. I want these guys to own the most amount of the city, own the most relics. Not concerned with growth. They don't feel the need to expand any more than they already are, because they own so much of the area already, and they're not too fussed with wiping out all other gangs, and they're just kind of okay. So they're just kind of there as a big hammer for when things go wrong, and they're very daunting for one's gang, due to the fact that seemingly one was giving out zones for like very little criteria to be met. Not really a gang, but law enforcement, as we spoke before. No limited interference. That is definitely not how you spell that word. I'm keeping it. I shouldn't keep it. Well, tell me how to spell the word, actually. Tell me, Google. Almighty Google. Tell me the secrets you hold. Yeah, is it just the A? Was it just the A that from fear? Because I spelled it like the word fear. What else were we gonna say about the law enforcement? That they could be paid off. This is all we need for factions for the moment. We can look into creating more unique factions in the future if we need them. These will kind of be the most plot relevant ones, the 5 of these. But it's good to have like a bunch of smaller gangs around that it can create more interesting characters, side characters, just having a more full world, I guess. I guess the one last thing for tonight that I'll show you is the power concepts. Stupid idea for a triple encounter. Kind of like if it was like DMing for D&D or something. How I would have a combat encounter go. Because a lot of these ideas that you can use for comics, you could actually use for like a fun D&D setting, if that's what you were into. This one will have a lot of fun creating, and we'll visit at a later date. But for now, how the power works. So, because one of the things that I struggled the most with about this idea was how I was going to handle civilians and people who live in the city. Having a city where people can do all this crazy stuff with their powers and keeping it a secret, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to set up, because if, people are going to know about the powers if they see people fighting on the streets, which they will, since it's gang violence. They're going to be fighting. Yeah, it's difficult. So I thought I found a way that we can do it. Like, okay, first off, the problems that arise with having it be so that civilians know and can see powers. First off, the powers affect the people, so they can definitely see the people. It's not like they can't see what's happening to the people. So if, like, first, let's just say, one person can fly, it's not like people are just going to see that guy standing still while he's actually flying. That makes no sense. That's ridiculous. One thing that I did think about, because me and my friend like to um talk about like mythology and kind of how people perceive certain things. So I was thinking about adding this thing. So I'll go through it piece by piece. Civilians can not see, or maybe I should phrase it a different way. Civilians can see. It wasn't supposed to be a stupid plot twist. No. Civilians can see zones. People with zones can not see zones. Now, the whole idea behind this was the fact that we have it so nobody knows when another person's zone is being activated on them. You only really know when your own zone is activated. And that's because it's just kind of an extension of you. Whereas civilians see it as a kind of seeping mist. Whenever a zone activates, like a mist or a fog spreads out through the area, and it's a very dense and obscures vision. A good way to see if anyone's using a zone and someone with the possibility of using zones is in your area is to actually have a lot of your gang members not have zones, which is a lot of what I talked about um with having lower tier members not have zones. People that don't have zones will see it as a mist, so they know someone is using their zones nearby. So any of the crazy stuff that goes on is being obscured by the fog. But there's always aftermath. Let's just say there's someone with a zone that sets things on fire, or spews lava, or spews magma. If something did that, there would be repercussions. Like the damage wouldn't just disappear. But that's kind of where the fog comes in to it. The fact that the city exists. The city exists and it has this fog. And whenever the fog is around, people are like, get inside. We want to get inside. That fog does some weird shit. We can't explain what it does. People go into the fog trying, so there are plenty of people who are curious about fog and actually run towards it and want to find out what's going on. So while like two gang members are fighting or multiple gang members are fighting, the people looking on outwards, so just say like it's a 2-on-2 fight and everyone's using their zones. All four people are using their zones, and there's a fifth person on the outside. They see is a bunch of fog, and from this like fog, they can't see anything. They can't go into the fog and find out what's going on. Some weird, bizarre stuff happens, and naturally, there's scientists that are trying to say like, okay, we believe this happens when there's something in the fog, or we believe there's a bunch of rumors and there's a bunch of, ideas and theories of what the fog is, but nobody really knows except, the people that have and know about relics. Yeah, so if you're not clued in on what relics are, then you have no idea what this fog is. You kind of live in fear of it. Your city is just kind of home to like this fog that exists. And the fog wasn't always there when the city was built, and that kind of leads to like the population density of the whole city not being all too high for a city population. A lot of people moved away in fear of the fog, but there's still just a great deal of people who can't just move away, and it is a city and it has its own environment. So generally, it's okay as long as you're indoors, yeah, like at home or like in your workplace. You're not going to be encountering this fog. It's not going to seep through the windows to get nothing crazy is going to happen while you're indoors. So people kind of see it as in, as long as we're inside, we're kind of safe. which, you know, isn't always the case, but for the most part, yeah, that's what people believe. So they live in the city with this fog that they believe roams around and appears randomly, and scientists try to track down, and they try to observe patterns between when the fog appears and such. And this is just sorry for going so much, put so much detail into this already, for just how civilians observe other people using their powers, but it is an important facet of the story. So that's how they observe fog. People run into fog and they're like, oh, you know, I was in fog before, it's like some fire monster, and then they go, or they witness like an electrical storm, and they're like, what? I don't understand. What was different between this fog and the last fog? And, you know, there's just a bunch of theories. We'll move past it. There's a lot to it of how other people observe relics being used and zones being activated, because they're not all aware of what's going on, because it's being kept a secret from them by the underground, pretty much. Is something I talked about in my introduction video, and you might see as my channel trailer, which is how zones work in terms of how powerful your zone power is. It's proximity based, it's time based, and it is training based. What does that mean? The closer you are to your relic, the more potent and more powerful your abilities are. This is generally, it's hard to measure in terms, because everyone's powers work differently, but the closer you are to your relic, so the closer, which aren't necessarily something you can move easily. Maybe there's a way to move them. We can still talk about this. We can talk about what relics are. For now, they're just a vague term I use for the thing that have been unearthed that give people powers. So the closer you are to your relic, the closer you are to your own turf, your own area, your own like home, the more powerful you are. Because I kind of like the idea that going on the aggressive is a lot more difficult than, you know, like standing your own ground. So to be able to go on the offensive and seize other people's land and areas of the city, it's just it's more of a task, because you're further away from your relic, so you're weaker, and they're closer to their relic, so they're stronger. So going into enemy areas, very difficult. The longer you're attached to your relic, the more powerful your abilities would become. So naturally, it gives you a kind of more powerful like repertoire, and to just use your abilities much greater than you could have before. Even if you hadn't trained your abilities, spending time attached to the same relic gives you a natural buff, pretty much. But you are able to detach yourselves from relics, which may be something that I should write down right now. Can detach and attach to other relics. Bracket, one at a time. Yeah, so the longer you're attached to the same relic, the more powerful you become. If you delink from one relic and attach to another, you still have the same ability as you had before. Your ability doesn't change. Your ability is unique to yourself. It isn't something the relic gives you, it's more of something that it unlocks. But we can go into that at a later date. You're naturally, you've just gotten weaker if you just decide, I'm going to go from this relic to this relic, because it's more convenient for me to go over here, because since I'm closer to this area, I'll benefit for being closer, so I'll be stronger in proximity to this relic, so I'll attach myself to this. Wrong, because now you've just reset those 5 years that you've put in with that gang, which is kind of serves to improve gang members and improve their loyalty, because, or it just rewards the people that have been more loyal, because you're just stronger if you've been attached to the same gang and you've been loyal to the same gang for all these years. If you've been attached to the same gang for multiple years and you've been working your way up and you've been putting in the time into that gang, because that's what you're loyal to, you care about the gang, they're more of a family to you, then the relic is actually pretty beneficial for that. Not inherently what it was designed for or why the relic exists, but it does benefit you in that way. The third is training. You just naturally have to train with your relic to get a good understanding, or train with your zone to get a good understanding of what you can do and what you're capable of. One thing that I have yet to decide on is whether or not you know what your zone does before you bring it out for the first time. Because finding out what you can do is always kind of is a fun thing, and I think people need to figure out what they're doing, which kind of puts one in a difficult position at the start if a bunch of people get random abilities that they don't know how to control or know what they even do. It's like, what if some dude gets like a super powerful zone that's like I switch the I take the soul of anyone who's in my zone. There's just some bullshit like that, but it just accidentally activates that in front of like all of his friends. Train with your zone. It just rewards people that work hard, and I think would be beneficial to the story all in all. And as I've written here, you can attach and detach yourself to any relic, which kind of benefits what will be happening later on in the story, which is gangs that own multiple relics. Because, if you've expanded and taken over enough land, you're like, shit, where do it's essentially, you can kind of view it in terms of war, where you're like, where should we keep the capital? Where would you keep your relic? We own all this land. If we keep it in the center, as we slowly spread out, we become weaker and weaker. But if you have multiple relics, you have like an east relic and a west relic, and you can go between each of those and kind of set yourself up. It resets how strong you are based off of your time that you've been attached. But you can kind of designate people, hey, we're part of this gang, but we need you to go to the West Relic, and that's where you're stationed, and they kind of treat it somewhat like that. There's a lot of areas we can play around with this in the future. I shouldn't really focus on it all too much now. What else do we need to talk about for the powers? Bestows / unlocks unique personal trait zone. I'm gonna have it so I think I like what we talked about, having you not know what's going on. Unaware of capability at first. I like the idea of people having abilities that they don't quite know what it does. Yeah, no two people can have the same thing. If you attach to a different relic, your ability won't change. You can't just cycle through a bunch of powers. It's not how things work. There's definitely more I need to discuss about the relic, about the zones. Oh, yeah, one very big thing that I've been omitting until now, and was kind of, it's a weird premise, honestly. Um, and I've said it to a few people, and they're like a bit on the fence about the idea, but I think it can make for some very interesting fight scenes and keep things fresh. And that's, you can activate your zone. That is something that's in your control fully. Once your zone is activated, anyone within that zone that can use zones is capable of also using your zone. Now, that might get a bit confusing. Maybe I should explain that better. So, if Water Zone guy is against Flying Zone guy, flying zone guy like flies around. As long as he is in the zone, which is just an area of an effect, which I should definitely write down just simply. Since it's like an area of an effect, the guy who's flying can like keep distance, and the guy who controls water can like shoot at him. But then whenever the guy who's flying gets into range, he can shoot water back at this guy. Probably a lot less proficiently than the guy who uses water can do it, but he can do it nonetheless. And the water guy is in proximity of the flying guy. He can also fly, probably a lot less skilled and a lot more clumsily than the guy who's trained with it and knows how to use it. So this will come into play later, and you'll see in multiple different fights where, water guy starts flying at flying guy because he's in the area of effect. And then flying guy decides, there's a bunch of flat trash that I can land in beneath me, but beneath you is pavement, so I'm going to turn off my zone. And because he's turned off the zone, both of them will begin to plummet, because water guy can only use flying guy's zone as long as he has it activated. Even if flying guy's on the ground and has it activated, water guy can use it. If he's in the air, water guy can, and too far away, he won't be able to use it. If he's close enough, the water guy can use it, but he can turn it off, which means he can't use his ability, but neither can the water guy. Which leads to a lot of different dynamics between, character interactions and fights. I was right. Bestowing culture. No. Hazardly. There we go. Hopefully that'll do. I have that idea down anyway. I've talked about it multiple times. I just thought I should write it down just in case. I may as well just append. Only the user may toggle the ability. So I think that concludes everything for today. We covered a lot more areas than I thought I would have initially. We haven't gone into too much detail, honestly. Let's just kind of summarize what we did. We went over kind of what the power concepts are, or how the power functionality works. We can go over fun concepts together at a later date, probably next stream, but who knows. Yeah, so we talked about a lot. We talked about power functionality. We talked about some of the basic ideas that we were using to construct our story. We have the factions themselves, or 5 main factions, you could say. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming out here. I hope you enjoyed our little discussion. Although, judging by the time, it's not so much a little discussion, but hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Come back next time for when we discuss the abilities and powers of certain characters.